Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome to the NYU Game Center lecture series. We're kicking off this season of the lecture series right. I'm very excited about what's going on tonight. Before we begin, as always, quick shout out to the sponsors that help make the Game Center lecture series possible. So that's DOTS, Take-Two, Vicarious Visions, Activision, and Fresh Planet. How about a quick hand for the sponsors digging into their pockets and helping us put together an awesome lecture series. I love those guys. So tonight I'm very excited to have Steve and Karla here, two of the co-founders of Fullbright Studio, which is, I think, one of the most important game studios on the planet. Fullbright, of course, famous for the game Gone Home, which was a kind of watershed moment in game design. The development and the release of that game kind of like changed a lot in the history of contemporary game design, and of course went on to continue to do amazing work with their recent release, Tacoma. And Fullbright, I think, paradigmatic in some ways of this moment in games, the shift in importance from work being done in big budget AAA studios to a kind of focus on smaller scale independent work that was more personal and more experimental and more challenging. And so I'm extremely excited to talk to them about their experience and their background and their process and how they think about games and what it's like to run an independent game studio in 2018. So please join me in welcoming Steve Gaynor and Karla Zimonja. Please come on. Hello. Please come in, have a seat. And now I've already messed up the ability to make this be just escape, okay? And now, I apologize. Yeah.
This is strange.
Yeah. We're going to make this happen. Hi.
Hello.
Hi. There you go. That seems to be working. Fantastic. I think I hit the wrong thing. I appreciate it. Thank you, Brendan. All right. So, first of all, thank you very much for coming. And today I thought it would be good to just kind of have a conversation about your background, your experience, your process, and maybe kind of loosely structured by chronology. So, if we go back to the origin of Fullbright, you are two of the three founding members, is that right? And you worked together in the sort of AAA industry at 2K Marin, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so going back to, when is this? 2000 and...
I started there 2008.
Yeah, I think it's fine. Is this actually doing anything?
Is that on?
I don't know.
Give it a, say something, and then...
What if I said something
There
really
you go.
loudly?
Yeah.
Oh, I have
Can
to
we
say
hear
loud
Karla?
things.
Okay, that's working.
Okay, that's
All right.
fine then.
Good.
Just loud. Yeah, I think
you're
I
like
came
a
on
year later or
a little after you, yeah.
Okay, so we're talking 2008, 2009.
Yeah.
Karla, your background was in animation?
Yeah, I started in TV and then moved to MMO games and thereby other games.
Okay. And Steve, you had been doing level design and that was your background and focus.
I was also a blogger.
Okay, level setter and a blogger, and the two of you worked together on the DLC for BioShock 2, which was Minerva's Den, right?
That's right.
Okay. So let's take a look at the trailer for that game, and this will kind of like help people, a lot of us who may or may not be familiar with that game, get a sense of what we're talking about. So here's the trailer for Minerva's Den. Yeah.
That's my handwriting. That's my handwriting.
I dreamed of a computer that could think for itself.
Mom, what's 7 times 12? Don't ask me.
Silly.
Ask the computer tutor.
And using Rapture's technology, I made that dream reality.
The Rapture Central Computing Mainframe performs over 1 million calculations per second.
A machine that can actually think, reason for itself.
The Thinker, the most helpful machine in Rapture.
Okay, nice.
So that still works pretty well.
That's
Yeah,
fun.
I think so too.
That's
It's a
fun.
beautiful trailer. So give us a picture of what life was like at 2K Marin when you were working on this project. How big was that studio? How big was the team? What was it like on a daily basis?
Oh man, our team was really small. It was like 9-ish actual devs and stuff. I don't know how big was the studio at that point.
So I think at the time that BioShock 2 shipped, it was about 80 people on site, and
That sounds
then
about
other, like outsourcers and a different studio made the multiplayer and stuff like that. But at the office, it was about 80 people, and then there were 9 full-time developers on the DLC, which is possible because you're making more content for a game that already exists as opposed to
Yeah.
building something from scratch.
And
And-
also, there were, higher ups and, advisors and stuff that were
Right,
part
yeah,
of those
people that weren't working on it all day, every day.
Yeah.
And other games being made at that studio, or was it just?
They were
BioShock?
starting to roll up on another game at that time. Everyone else who wasn't us.
Is that what? Why am I thinking 2K Marin is also famous for a sports game? What am I thinking of?
I mean, 2K Sports is very.
Yeah, but is that in the Marin?
It's in the
studio?
same building, but it had nothing to do with it.
Okay,
I think
so-
Not with us, at least.
So
Right.
you guys were not hanging out with the 2K Sports
No,
developers?
but apparently, at least
Really?
at one point, Snoop Dogg was in the building
Okay.
for 2K basketball stuff.
Okay.
But no, it was on a different floor. We were very much just
Yeah.
our own studio that was there. I was the 16th employee of the studio, so I was there from pretty early. Because it was 6 or 8 people that came over from Irrational to be the
Yeah.
seed crew, something like that.
It was pretty low, yeah.
Yeah, and then they started hiring, and it was a really good time for someone like me to get involved because they were early enough. They were early enough, and the timeline was long enough. They were still taking chances on people. So my experience before 2K Marin was I had been a level designer on the second expansion pack for the first-person shooter Fear, which is not certainly not a big title, and not prestigious, etc. Fear is
it's kind of a famous.
the second expansion pack is
Maybe not the second. Not as famous.
but and as I mentioned, I was blogging about game design stuff. Thoughts about design and narrative and all that kind of.
Do you think your blogging experience helped you get hired?
100%. Fast forwarding slightly, the name Fullbright was the name of my blog, and Fullbright is a level design jargon term. So we're just level design all the way down.
I did not know. What does Fullbright mean?
Fullbright mode is when you turn all of the lighting to 100% in a level, so there's no like shadows or anything. You basically
Okay.
turn off the lighting so everything is
Okay.
full bright, and you can see what's in the corners.
I'd always thought that your studio name was a reference to the scholarship.
Nope. It's a button you click in a level
Okay,
editor to
okay. All right,
line
good
up
to know.
textures in the corner of a room that
Okay.
would normally be dark.
And so you, did you feel at that time that you were living the dream, that you were working in the game industry? This was like a pleasure. What was it like to work at 2K Marin?
I mean, I feel like it was. I
Yeah,
mean,
for
like
me
that
it was, yeah.
pretty great, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think for both of us, in a lot of ways, it was kind of our first time working on a project that we had like a lot of investment in, and that we
Yeah.
kind of got to be really involved with. You know, I mean, like
Yeah.
BioShock 2. You know, like especially when you get signed on for that game, it's like, oh, like, okay. So to your question about the blogging thing, right? So I wrote a blog about like game design stuff, and it was like reposted on Gama Sutra and stuff like that, right? But I was not doing high profile work at the time, and I wrote this post called The Wager that was right before GDC 2008, and it was this thing about basically how video games are always going to be bad. Kind of like I was sort of like we're at this point where it's like, oh, games are going to grow up and be different, and and I'm like, I don't think so. What do you want to bet, right? And it was like kind of if Twitter had existed more then, it would have been like very hot take-y. But and it still kind of was at the time, because like it got passed around a lot and like you know, whatever. So I went to GDC that year. I knew people who had connections to like Irrational and people that were going to start 2K Marin and stuff, and they were like, oh, you should go talk to them if you know, like if you, it seems like you would want to work on something like that, you should. And I was like, well, why do they want to talk to me? Like, they're making the sequel to BioShock. Like, I shipped an expansion pack. I don't know. But they were like, no, you should go talk to them. So I went and talked to them, and they had read the article on my blog, and so they knew who I was before I started talking to them. And that's a huge advantage, because you have something to talk about, and they're like, oh, you're that guy that said that thing that I give a shit about, right? So it was very helpful. And, yeah, at the beginning, when they were doing initial hires, it was kind of like, well, this guy doesn't have a lot of experience, but he seems like he has interesting ideas, and we have time for him to learn how to actually do the job, so we'll bring him. Like, you know, a year later, it probably wouldn't have been an option for me. The other person that started with me that same week, the other level designer that was hired to be, you know, to kind of start the level design side on that project was Tynan Wales, who we started the same week, and he didn't have any experience like being a 3D like first person shooter level designer, but he had worked on a number of 2D games that had been like won IGF and stuff, and he similarly like cared deeply about these kinds of games, and it was a similar kind of thing where they were like, well, you can learn, you're interesting, you're the kind of person that we want to have working on this kind of project, and so we kind of got to start together. And now Tynan is one of the two level designers at Fullbright. So we still work together now.
But yeah, the important thing to consider is just that when they were starting, you know, 2K Marin, like the founders were designers, and like it's a very like founder,
level designers specifically.
Yes, and like founder effect is real. Like the super like, you know, that people like Steve and whatnot were interviewed, and like they just had to be like, do you have a design sensibility that we can get behind? Like, you know, do you make sense with us and like mesh with our philosophy? And it was less about the like, you know, do you check these boxes? And it was really kind of a unique time in that way, I feel.
For sure.
And it was so like offices in a big building, was like a mini mall. Like, paint us a picture physically. What was it like?
It was a strip mall.
Yes,
It was next to a dry cleaners. No.
I want this to be true. It was an old airplane hangar.
Really?
Up in Northern California.
And beautiful Marin, which is gorgeous, and the weather's nice. So you were.
We were next to a marsh.
And so does
that part is true.
So the idea for doing BioShock DLC, did someone then say to you, here's what we want you to do, or did they say, bring us some ideas for how this should work?
Yeah.
They you know, this was around the time that there was a lot of like single player or standalone story based DLC. You know, that was kind of like making waves. So there was like a bunch of the Mass Effect 2 DLC was really interesting, and there was like Undead Nightmare for Red Dead Redemption, and just other stuff and like the campaign DLC for GTA 4. And, there's sort of like, oh, this is a thing that people do. So they were like,
it's a thing that people do in a short period of time.
yes,
it doesn't cost that
it doesn't
much.
cost very much, but can make money.
Yes.
And so, they were like, we want to do some post-release DLC for BioShock 2, and it was like, we want, at least one of those to be like a significant story-based DLC. And like Karla was kind of alluding to, everybody who was working at 2K Marin, they had been working on BioShock 2 for, 2 years, 2.5 years, whatever the dev cycle of the game was, depending on when they got hired. And the other project that was going on was the XCOM shooter title, and so
not the Firaxis one.
Right. Yes, not the turn-based one, the one that was 2K Australia, and then et cetera, et cetera. And so at the time that BioShock 2 was finishing, a lot of people were like, I just want to work on something new. I want to work on the new thing. I'm tired of,
get me out of there.
being underwater. And like my thing was like, I joined the studio to work on BioShock. I got ideas. Like I can make more BioShock. Let's do it,
I mean, pretty much everyone on the team got to be like, you going to stay or not? And they were all kind of like, yeah, I'll stay and keep doing BioShocks. Like, it was a positive choice from everyone. Everybody else, the whole rest of the studio was like, see you.
Yeah, the people that that worked on the DLC opted into it,
Yes.
I think. Yeah.
And
It is true.
does 2K Marin have producers? So
Yeah.
there are people
For sure.
who are like in charge of budget and schedule, and
Yes.
and so were you given a budget and a schedule, and can you give us a sense of like
We never
what
had
that
to
was like?
know anything about budget. We definitely had a schedule.
Yeah. What was the schedule like?
They needed the the DLC to be released 6 months after the commercial release of the game. 3 of us started working on it 3 months before the main game was released. So Karla and me and our lead artist started doing the story development, doing the mechanical development of what we were going to do differently with the DLC, and I did all of the gray blocking and initial like scripting of the progression through the thing. And then when the main game was finished, we rolled on 6 more people to put it into full production. And then it shipped in August after the main game had shipped in February.
Was the first step a kind of story meeting? Like, were you hashed out what the overall flow of it was going to be?
The first step was, so sometimes it pays to be the obnoxious overachiever kid. So before when they started talking about DLC, I emailed people higher up for me, and I was like, I have some ideas for DLC. And then by the time they were like, we need somebody to start working on DLC, they were like, Steve said he wanted to do it. Go for it. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. So like it started from me being like, what if you went to this part of Rapture or this part of Rapture? Let's talk about it. But then when it turned into an actual thing, it was like, okay, like let's talk about what those ideas are and how they actually turn into this self-contained kind of story DLC thing and go from there.
And how precise did that get? Did you have like a full script before doing different levels, or did you kind of have a rough sense of the overall flow and then start making levels and then refine what you thought would happen with the characters in the story?
I think that we started with a premise that was sorry, I don't want to spend too much of this time talking about a fucking DLC. It started from a premise that was basically just I wanted to retell the first part of System Shock 2 because that's where BioShock came from, and I was a fan, and so I was like, we'll do a standalone story where there's So the second side of it is I was like, there's clearly like computerization in Rapture. It would be cool to visit the computer center of Rapture. And so what if there's like a steampunk AI element and we kind of do the System Shock thing via that? So that was the starting point that kind of got greenlit, and then we worked on like a more detailed kind of like outline flow of like, here's what'll happen, here's what the final reveal will be. And we relied on our lead designer and the creative director of the main game, Zach McClendon and Jordan Thomas, to give feedback on like, what do you think of this? And to their credit, they were kind of like, we see what you're going for, but I don't think it's really it doesn't have the impact you're looking for, and so we workshopped it a little bit, and we came up with a slightly better version of it, and they were like, no, yeah, okay, let's do that. And then you go from there to like, here are going to be the main points in each level. you're going to have to go here and click this, so you can go here to click this, and here's the main story point that happens when you do that, and then you start filling in the blanks, I think.
Okay.
Design focus studio. Like there's no way nobody has written the script before you are ready to start building levels or anything like that. It's like
And that's been true of all of our stuff.
Yeah, it super has. I mean, like we did have to have it done, in a fairly timely manner because we were recording voice, and so we actually did have to get that done earlier than was ideal, as always is. But yeah, no, it's levels.
So Minerva's Den comes out and it's a success, and then you end up, Steve, going to Irrational to work on BioShock Infinite, and you, Karla,
I
stayed on
2K XCOM for a time,
and
For just about exactly a year.
yeah, and then how do we get from there to you deciding to found your own studio?
Well, yeah, I worked at Irrational for a year. I had a really, really good experience there. I guess, at the time, I think I was the only person with the title senior level designer, so my main job was to work with Ken Levine on him being like, here are the main plot points that need to happen in this level, and work with the lead designer to be like, here's the mechanics that need to be introduced, and then my job was to write pitch documents that were like, here's how that turns into a level and like what actually happens, and then go over those things and revise them, and then finally, it's like, this is good enough, do the first gray block and kind of the initial prototype. So I did a lot of that like planning and first pass stuff on kind of the first half of the game. But after a year, my wife and I didn't really want to be in Boston anymore, and I had gone from working on a big project to a project that had less than 10 people on it that we really got to be invested in and own all of and be like, passionate about and have it really be ours, to a huge studio on an even bigger project. And after a year being there, it's just sort of like, I don't want to work on things that are this big anymore.
Yeah, XCOM was also very big, and just like there were all these layers of people, and there were all these writers all of a sudden, and like having to, it was a lot.
So it's almost like, it sounds like working on the DLC on this smaller team had given you guys a taste of this like proto-indie development process.
Absolutely correct.
And then once you went back into this like the big iron of AAA, big budget development, you were like, you missed that.
Yeah, like we were able to pilot a really nimble vessel when we were working on a small DLC thing, and then you go back and you're like, oh, I'm somewhere in the back of a huge ship that I can't even tell where it's going. Is it, it's like you want to be able to do the thing where you get to actually see the whole project and everybody you're working with at once.
So now, when you were working on BioShock Infinite, did you have a sense of like, this game would be better without combat? Was that in your mind?
I wouldn't say so.
You were just, this is the thing I'm working on.
It wasn't in the state that
did you have
would think that.
Gestating this idea of like, oh, what if we had these aesthetics, but not crappy combat?
I think more it was...
I don't think Infinite's where that came from, but thank you.
You're right, yeah.
It's not great combat.
Right?
Can we admit that now?
Really, but,
BioShock Infinite does not.
By the time I left, it didn't even really have combat, so like that's not my situation. But like I would say that it really more the thing that's really interesting is I had been working on my blog for probably like 3 or 4 years, and a lot of the essays are just like, here's stuff I'm thinking about, here's something, I noticed this in games, and here's an implication of a mechanic, wouldn't it be more interesting? That kind of like, what do I find most interesting about the potential things you could do with games that I've played, right? And so like, in a lot of ways, the conceptual pre-production for Gone Home was done in my blog for years ahead of time, where I was sort of like, being in a place as like the point of an interactive experience is like powerful in a meaningful way, and like supporting your understanding of what the place means and who the people are that inhabited that place, and you being able to inhabit it in your own, kind of like position as a player, kind of exploring and finding and reconstructing this idea of what does it mean to be here, is super interesting. And so as we went into starting our own project, we were sort of like, we know how to make BioShock stuff. That's like what we've been doing professionally for the last couple of years.
And that is a good distance towards making what we ended up making. Like what Steve was talking about, like, having a lot of, mise en place and everything, and having, environmental cues that tell you about the world and about characters in the world. Like, this is all present in like Bioshock 1, 2, and Minerva's Den, like very strongly.
And audio diaries, like, as a central mechanic.
Yeah, for sure. And like, we did a bunch of things that we ended up doing later in Gone Home, like straight up in Minerva's Den. Like we had a reveal room. We had it's also straight from Bioshock, but like it's, we had a set of newspaper clippings about an incident. Like,
Gone Home was effectively
stuff.
subtractive of Bioshock and allowed us to say, if we started out as 3 people, we ended up being 4 people on Gone Home, but it's like, we can't do combat and we can't do 12 levels.
Right.
So how do we do 1 level that's all environmental storytelling? Well, I think we know how to do that. And we saw the potential from things like Dear Esther and 30 Flights of Loving and even like Amnesia, The Dark Descent, which is a horror game, but a non-combat horror game, to say like, oh, you can make and Proteus, it's sort of like 2011-ish kind of stuff.
Right.
To be able to say like, you can do exciting things in first person without combat, and our version of that can be giving you granular access to every detail of an environment and making them all relevant and making that be how you come out of the experience with an impression that is unique to your interpretation of what you found.
Yeah. When I think of this moment, this historical moment, I sort of tell the story of that in a way Gone Home is kind of what a game like Bioshock Infinite wanted to be, right? To me, the qualities of Bioshock Infinite that are great are the sense of place, the immersive quality of the experience, the environmental storytelling, and so the story that I always tell is that Ken Levine did not have the courage of his convictions to pursue that to me, it feels like he felt an obligation to include the trappings of conventional gameplay because he felt that it was necessary, right? I mean, am I projecting too much into that? You were there.
I
did
think
you feel
are.
that tension? did it feel like? Because I remember the
big old
interview,
call out. Yes, you are.
I remember the interview with Ken where he talked about the frat boys need this picture of a guy with a gun on the cover of the game.
Sure.
There was a sense that he felt like there was a weight of obligation that he would have liked to have just explored this as a place. Now, how realistic is that, or is that imagination?
I think that in no way do I want to speak for Ken.
Sure, but go ahead and do it.
B, I think all I'll point out is like a game of that scale with that level of expectation. I mean, it's a sequel to a shooter game, and the first, Bioshock was a shooter game in genre with the additional environmental storytelling and like character and political elements of it. Mm-hmm. It's inherently, I think, a game about combat and upgrades and not just finding a story in a place, but defining a play style. And am I going to be a stealth player or a full-on combat player? Or I'm going to try to only use plasmids. Like that kind of stuff, I think, is and was considered legitimately interesting at Irrational for all of those projects. And I think the flip side of it is, you work for a publisher that's put tens of millions of dollars into your game, and they want you to make it sell. Like, it doesn't all come down to what you want. Yeah. So I would say it's complicated, and I don't have any idea if Ken would have any interest in making a non-combat game, but I would say that we know that both sides of that coin were valuable to the team and the creative people that made them.
Right.
We were able to say, if we're making something small in our basement, we can make it just be about the side of it that we care more about.
So this is now 2010? 2012, and you moved to Portland. You answer the call and also move to Portland at this point?
Correct.
I answered the call to adventure.
Yep, and you're like, let's do this thing.
Also the phone call from Steve.
a literal call.
Nice.
And you move to Portland and you create Fullbright and start to work on this game, which we're now going to look at the trailer for. Okay?
There's this girl. Her name is Lonnie. And she gave me this tape and said, "You have got to listen to this." she gave me this tape. I haven't stopped playing it since.
It was important that was all diegetic. So two things I remember about that trailer. One, we entered it into IGF, and we put that trailer up when we entered it into IGF. And I remember the GDC that we were in IGF. You were walking past me on the sidewalk, and we crossed, and you went past me, and then you turned around, and you're like, Steve, by the way, great trailer.
Nice.
I called it.
Extremely good.
It is a great trailer.
Thank you. The second thing is, like, because we made it in our basement, like, I did the video capture and edited the song and audio down to length, and Karla did the video editing and the titles, so it was all very handmade.
Oh, yeah.
And when was the trailer made in the overall process? Like
6 months into development?
Yeah,
Okay.
weirdly early.
6 months into how long was the total time for
17
Gone Home?
months.
So okay, and what was that process like? So obviously, Gone Home, super important game, and what like. So for example, one of the things that makes that trailer amazing is the use of music to create a sense of place and time, and to communicate the idea that this is a different game, that it is not a genre game, this is not fantasy or science fiction or horror or any of the kind of typical pulp genres of video games, that this was going to be about humans in a particular, on the earth,
Right,
and a particular time. And so how early did you know that was going to be an essential part of the game, like the story and the setting and the time?
I kind of feel like that was the whole thing from the beginning.
I mean, but to Karla's point, it was all of our stuff has been very design driven.
Yeah, that's true.
So like our starting point was not we want to make a game about the 90s or a game about a love story. We were like, we want to make a game where you explore a place and find out a story from what you find. And so the nice thing about starting, I think, from design first and mechanics first instead of premise or fiction first is it gives you a bunch of questions to answer. Like the question isn't what do we want to make a game about? The question is like, for instance, when you're 3 people in a basement, what game can we make? Right.
Because what do we want to make a game about is infinite.
Right. Yes.
and fun to answer.
And so for us we were like, okay, first person. Explore a place, find stuff, find out about the people that live there, discover a story that way, and so then it it starts to open up. You have actual blanks to fill in that are like, okay, well, what kind of place? Who was there? What is the time period if it's in the real world?
I think we always had it grounded to the real world, though. I feel like that was never off.
We always wanted it to be a real world thing because we never wanted it to be about like elves or anything. Yeah. But like we didn't know more about that, right?
What's wrong with us? Why don't we make a game about elves?
I heard Skyrim makes money. Maybe we should have. But
that's what we should have.
So when you founded Fullbright, you didn't already say, "Oh, I know what we're going to make. It's going to be a game about riot girls in the 90s."
No.
It was just, okay.
Oh, no, that did not come first.
Yeah,
but you had some ideas that were pointing at it.
I mean, it was original, like, the very first pitch was in a house. But I think that was less of the reason because we kind of rethought stuff mechanically. Yeah. The real question is, like, if you need to be exploring a place and find the story of who lived there and what happened to them, and it can't, be like a gigantic, a whole city or something, right? Then, like, what is it? And we were like, well, I mean, a family's house, right? Like, a family lives there. If you go into anyone's house that's lived there for years, you will know a lot about them from just what's on the shelves, what's on the walls. If in a game like Gone Home, you can literally go through their underwear drawers, like, you can know a lot about people from just, like, what they carry and what they keep and what they don't discard and all that kind of stuff, right? There's, like, layers of character and history in a lived-in place that would allow us to say, okay, you can go around a house and find out about a family, cool. And then the time period thing was like, we don't want the internet, we don't want cell phones, we don't want digital stuff, right? Like you need to be able to open a drawer and find a note not find the password to Dad's computer and read all of his emails.
Right.
Because then, like, you've read all of his emails, there's the whole, okay, there's
You did
Dad's
it,
shit right
yeah.
there. Like, why would you go anywhere else?
Yeah, we had not solved the problem, and also we didn't think we had to solve the problem. But like, yeah, it's a huge pacing breaking like cache of freaking information.
Right.
It's just
So
like
interesting.
awful.
This is so interesting to hear how much of these kind of like essential kind of thematic elements are the result of design problem
Oh, yeah,
solving.
Yeah.
100%.
It's
I mean,
really
even
amazing.
the core story was
Procedural.
us being like, okay, we've got a family in a house in the 90s. There has to be, a core conflict.
Yeah, what's the interfamilial conflict?
Right,
Yeah.
like the conflict has to happen in the
Yeah.
house. If all the conflict happens
Right.
outside of the house, then
we
you're
don't get
exploring
to
a house
see
where
any
nothing
of it.
happened,
Yeah.
right?
So it has to be stuff that actually occurs where you can see it where you are. And
a
so-
lot of stuff in the
yeah.
game in the story moments does happen outside of the
It's
house,
true.
but it's where the people live. It's like the people that it's about are here, right?
Right.
And the evidence
And
they would
evidence
bring
does have
home
to be
with
there,
them
yeah.
is there, right? So like that was the point where we were like, okay, what are irreconcilable family conflicts? It's like, okay, classic paradigms, Romeo and Juliet, Montagues and Capulets are not very current, but, a kid falling in love with the wrong person is a thing that families can just not get over. So you're like, okay, pretty subjectively, Karla and I were like, we're more interested in
fine,
talking
yeah.
about a young woman's experience. She'll fall in love with another girl. The parents won't be happy about it. That's the thing. And so yeah, and at that point it was stuff like, okay, well, we'll set it in the Portland area. It's familiar. We can do that intuitively. Okay, well, 90s teenage lesbians. I guess we need to license some Riot Girl music. But luckily, Kill Rock Stars, which published the music of Bratmobile and Bikini Kill, which we didn't get Bikini Kill, and Heavens to Betsy, which was Corin Tucker's first band, who she later went on to be the singer of Slater-Kinney. Kill Rock Stars is based in Portland, so we could
Literally
go
in
down to
town.
their office
Yeah.
and knock on the door and be like, "We're making this video game."
So this is actually really interesting because I love thinking about how physical place has an influence on the work that you do. And so you were in Marin, this beautiful kind of idyllic landscape, living the dream. And then you moved to Boston, which is kind of like very different from that. And you were living less than a dreamlike experience. And then you moved to Portland.
Boston.
And
Less than a dreamlike experience. They just put that right on the door at Logan Airport. Just like, sorry, everyone.
and you're in a
I'm from there, it's
and you're in a
okay.
basement with three people. Who's the third person?
Janeman Nordhagen was our programmer. Third co-founder.
And you're
He's
living
most
in Portland.
recently made his own game, Where the Water Tastes Like Wine, that came out last year as well.
Exactly. And you're making a game which is also about place, and it's about this place. And you're also, licensing music from people who down the street. And so, what was daily life like for you in this basement? Was it cold?
Amazing
and damp?
phrasing of
Was
that
it-
question. What was it like in that basement
Was
day
it-
in and day out?
How did you live in
That
that
dank basement. Paint a picture for us.
I mean,
Mushrooms, sort of
Okay.
mold on our skin. Like we sort of
I hear
became
you.
like
again, if you've played Skyrim,
twisted, and our eyes became large so we could see in the basement. That's right.
we actually, my wife Rachel is here.
Somewhere.
We were lucky enough to get
over
to.
there.
Hello. We were lucky enough to get to move into Rachel's parents' house for
Okay.
the first 2 or 3 months of development, while Janeman and Karla got moved up to Portland. We made the very first revs of Gone Home in the dining room of Rachel's parents' house while they were out of town, and then we rented a house in northeast Portland. It was like a 3-bedroom house that you rent with roommates or whatever, except that we had our office in the basement. Our fourth developer on the game, Kate Craig, was up in Vancouver, BC. So she was always remote, but in the same time zone, and we visited her and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, the three of us, I mean, it was very organic, I would say. Like, it was a good time in all of our lives, I think, to just kind of be like, this is what we do. We get up in the morning, we wake up a little bit, we go down to the office, we work on stuff till we feel like taking a break. We go walk to get groceries together for an hour or two. We come back, let's work on stuff some more. It's like 8, let's knock off and watch Star Trek The Next Generation and drink whiskey in the living room for a few hours and then go to sleep and then do it again the next day and not remember whether it's Sunday or Wednesday because all the days are you're just doing the thing.
We were very immersed in it.
Which was like, I think it was really cool. It was good.
It was an interesting, it was a good
You know,
experience.
it felt like what I assume it's like to like be in a band that's all housemates together and just trying to record an album and shit. You know, it's like you're just, it's you.
Yeah.
And I think that the game benefited from it a lot, especially because Karla and I, who were, you know, like, I'm the writer, Karla's my editor, but we, like, collaborate on all the story stuff together. And us just being like, yeah, let's go take a walk to the liquor store to get more of that whiskey we need for later tonight. And then we're on our way there, and we're like, you know that thing? I was thinking, like, what should Dad do after he gets his book contract? You know, and it's like all of that can just kind of be happening all of the time.
Just hashing stuff out, like, always. And it was really good for the game. The game, like, would not have been nearly as well put together if we hadn't, like, just been able to be like, oh, hey, what about that? And, like, at any point.
Or, if,
and, like,
for me, just, like, turn around and just be like, did you... You know, you could, you know, have you thought about throwing that kind of thing in? You know, those
and
sorts
this is
of things.
irresponsible overall, work-life balance-wise. However, it was a good experience.
It's
for
not
a time.
sustainable, but it was,
it's not something you
it
can
was
do
the
forever.
thing.
You went from being on a 9-person team within a larger studio to then working on big projects with hundreds of people to now working with 3 people, 4 people, and no producer, right?
I mean, I was
Just
effectively the
Steve.
producer.
And so, did you kind of share that responsibility amongst yourselves, or were you the person kind of holding
The
people
game
to
was small.
milestones
I
and
mean,
deliverables?
We didn't really have anything like that. Our milestones and deliverables are things like an IGF demo or a press demo or a review build. We did a lot of playtest builds, so we would make a playtest build to send to other developers that we knew and stuff. So, like, there were milestones where it's like, we need to get XYZ into the game in the right shape for this thing that we want to send out or that we want to, you know, demo at or whatever.
Imposed
Similar-
by external things. Yeah.
Similar process or radically different process in terms of, like, are you using GitHub? Are you checking things in and out? What's the process
Well,
like?
we had Perforce, but
Yeah.
or Perforce, as you're supposed to say apparently.
Perforce? I think.
Oh God, definitely true.
No, I mean, you know, we had source control. We had a task tracking database.
Yeah.
It was pretty simple.
And it's similar to the process you had used on Minerva's Den.
It's slightly similar. I would say that since we didn't have actual producers, like, the project was small enough that for the most part I could keep it all in my head. So, like, pardon me, I was able to say, like, here are the things that I think we need to do in basically the order we need to do them for this thing. And they were mostly deliveries to me because I was the only level designer. So
Nobody else is going to put stuff in the level.
right, like, basically,
Turns out.
like, you know, like, on a project that size and with the team that we had and everything, like, I placed literally everything in Gone Home. So, like, if you see anything in the level, I put it there, which means that I had to touch literally everything in the game, which is a great way to be a filter for, like, making sure that everything goes into the game is the way that you want it to be. It doesn't scale, and it's not something that you can do for a long period of time, but for something like this, I can be like, so I just put this note on the floor, which means I had to look at it, which means that I noticed there was this thing that we could change about it, et cetera, et cetera. There was, like, no cracks to slip through except for me just not noticing shit.
You forgot my stickers.
No!
There was a really good set of stickers. that
Also,
got
Kate
completely
made
forgotten about.
a really beautiful lamp that I only placed
Yes!
one of in the
That was
entire
a
house.
good
We
lamp.
had 3 different, like, skins
Yeah,
for it,
it's up
but
in
I
the
just
guest
forgot
week.
that you could put it anywhere else. So.
Sad
These things happen.
affairs.
So, Gone Home, super important milestone in game design, right? It goes on to be a kind of definitive moment.
I mean, here's the thing I'll say about that.
Yeah.
Is I think most people wouldn't agree with you. I think most people would say
Yeah.
it is a milestone in storytelling in games. I
interesting.
think it actually is very design relevant because I'm a
Yeah.
designer. But I think that something that's really interesting about the reaction of the game and the way that people talk about it, and, like, fair enough, the point of a lot of the design that we did was for it to be not for the player not to consciously
Right.
think about it, right? Like, the idea behind an immersive sim is that the world always operates under consistent rules, so you can say, in this game, you open cabinets. If I ever see a cabinet, I can open it, and you don't have to think about it anymore, right? Like,
Hence the immersion part.
right, or like, you know, this is a house that's more or less in the shape of a house, which means it's not like a linear corridor, but we still want to guide the player along a linear story. So like that's all just like really wonky level design stuff of like, how do we get the player to go to the right place in the right order without them feeling like they're being led by the nose? How do we clue people in a way that they feel like they figured out what they need to do next, as opposed to us just saying, go here next, all that kind of stuff?
And that's apart from like the set dressing stuff of like giving them the stuff they expect to see in a house, such that they
Right.
believe it is a house.
Yeah.
But yeah, then that is also part of it. But yeah, indeed, there's a lot of like little things, little tricks that went into it, but they're all subtle generally.
Right, I mean,
except
that's-
for the like, go to this place and get the key.
Right. Which still, I think a lot of times people are like,
okay.
ooh, cool, a map to a secret place,
Yeah.
not like, oh, they're telling me to go here
Oh,
to
video game.
ungate the
Yeah.
next objective, right?
Yeah.
And to be fair, if you go into the, I mean, if you were to go into the Unity project of Gone Home and open it and you click on the note that's on the front door when you first come in, it is, the object name is Sister Objective Note. So like, very level designy, right?
Yeah.
So all I'm going to say is, I personally am very proud of the design of that game, because it was very deeply considered, and I think
sure.
as far as these things go, like, the only reason the story was successful was because the design supported it. So I appreciate you saying that.
Sure.
But I don't think it's something that people would normally
Well,
say.
I mean, but clearly everyone recognizes it as a watershed moment, right? Everyone recognizes it as a kind of definitive statement of a new kind of approach to video games,
Sure.
which is...
Thank you for saying watershed instead of seminal. I don't like when
Yeah.
people use such a gendered word.
Thank you.
I've
I
heard many
appreciate
people
that.
say that Gone Home is a seminal work, and I'm like, can we find something else?
Watershed
works.
It's a watershed. And, you know, how early in the process did you all start to get a sense that, oh, this is going to be a big deal? Did you ever get that sense?
After
Yeah,
it shipped
post-release.
and,
It wasn't
like,
until
we
I
saw
said nice
reviews.
trailer. Right? Yeah.
Well, this guy, no, actually, you know, there's like, it was maybe that same GDC, and I was talking to a games journalist who was on like the IGF judging panel, and there was a moment where, you know, he had been like in the industry for a long time, and I remember, you know, we were talking, and he had played the IGF demo, or he had played the, no, he must have played the press demo because he was a press guy, right? Because we had done a press tour around it, yeah, he was just sort of like, I've been doing this for a while, and sometimes you can just tell you guys are going to be okay, and I was like.
That's so sweet.
Okay. Like, I guess this guy thinks this is going to work out, you know what I mean? And so, like, those kinds of initial good signs of, like, just how people that we respected responded to the playtests and stuff like that, I think were encouraging, but I don't think, like, we assumed that when the game came out, there would be some people who would like it a lot because it was their thing they were into, and everybody else would just be like, I don't care about a story in a game, I'm
Ignore
just
it,
not going to play this. But the reaction on
instead.
both sides was like much more intense, in a way that we're very grateful for, right? Like, I'm not mad at people who are like, this is exactly what I don't want, and I'm mad about it. And I'm very grateful for the people who are like, this thing, you know, meant an enormous amount to me and changed my life. Like, but we never were like, that's what's going to happen until it did.
No, I mean, like, even the other, like, devs that we had play tested, they broke down along those lines of, like, this is interesting. All right, I think you're going somewhere with this. And the other people were just kind of like, I don't really get it. Why am I playing this?
Yeah,
and
why would I want to walk around this house?
Right.
I don't know.
And so hearing those, you know, responses, like, I completely was all kind of like, all right, we're going to get, like, a couple of diehard fans, maybe 5. And, like, everyone else is going to be like, what's this? Next.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what I would say about it is I think that by the time we shipped, we all thought that it was a good game.
We thought we did a good job.
That if we played it, we would like it.
Yeah.
So that's all you can really ask for.
Yeah.
Because you can't choose who else is going to feel that way
It's
about
funny
it.
though, because looking back now, Gone Home seems so clearly to capture something about that moment, the zeitgeist, right? You talk about the games that you were influenced by, the games that you were looking at, the games that you were thinking about, but then Gone Home was so declarative in its demonstration that you could have something that was compelling, obviously a game, successful artistically.
A lot of people wouldn't say that.
Commercially, but without combat and without puzzles, right?
Right.
But what's funny is that you look back on that now and it seems like, oh yeah, this was like a lightning rod for a moment in history, you channeled this really important set of ideas. but at the time, you didn't feel like history coursing through you. You didn't feel the zeitgeist. Like
I don't think so. No,
you just were
Not
doing
really,
a good
no.
job and thinking, oh, this is hopefully people.
I mean,
will
we
like
were
this.
excited to make something that we felt like we hadn't played before, which
Yeah.
was a good sign.
I want like the students who are in the room who are working on their projects and to like recognize that feeling, like, because that's the best, right? If you don't know, like everything you work on might be this really important, critical, like historical thing that people then look back on and like and they're inspired by and influenced by, and you could shift and change the whole course of games, and you might not know it, but what you do know is that you're working hard and you're doing a good thing that you like and you're proud of.
Yeah,
right?
I think you're right.
That's very true.
That's
yeah.
amazing.
You gotta just do the best thing you can do. But-
Do the best you can do and take other people's feedback very
That's
seriously.
true.
Like
Yeah.
we didn't
Listen to
no,
people.
no,
You sort
no.
of, but you also sort of ignored it because a lot of the feedback was like, "Nah, I don't really get it," and you're like,
but
"Oh,
okay.
we get it."
But if
So,
people are
no,
saying
that's-
like, I don't
yeah.
really care that much about this, and they don't have very much feedback.
That's
for
not
it.
actual
Okay.
feedback.
You know what
I see.
That is, yeah. We were trying to make our game better, not make the game that the people who didn't care about our game wanted.
Yeah,
very
That is not like that's not great
But so,
criticism.
so all I would say is like yes, but also like pull people to you to tell you what you're not seeing about it, because Gone Home would not be very good if we hadn't had a lot of smart people playtesting and get like okay. So this is a little
What's
bit
an example? Yeah.
This is a little bit name dropping and obnoxious, but we had sent out our first playtest build like before the IGF build. In early 2012, like maybe like 4 months after we had started working, 3 months after we started working on the game or something, and we had sent it to Harvey Smith and Joel Burgess, who is the lead level designer on Skyrim, and a number of other people, good people, notable, non-notable friends, whatever, but people that we trusted their opinion, and so we had sent it to those people, and I was at QuakeCon doing a live Idle Thumbs panel for the podcast that I used to be on, and Harvey and Joel had both played the Gone Home playtest build, and we were standing around talking about it, and Joel was like, I like what I was playing, but when you get to like the end of the upstairs, you really have to backtrack really far to go downstairs to where you're supposed to go. What if there was like secret passages in the house? It's like an old house, and I was like, secret passages are a good idea. Sure, let's do that. But like, I don't know if that's an idea that I ever would have even thought of. But you expose other smart people to your thing, and they'll help it be better in ways you can't predict.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about the follow-up, Tacoma. So how soon after releasing Gone Home did you start work on your next project?
It's like a year, a little
9 months.
less than a year.
Yeah, a little
Right.
bit less than a year. Yeah, and
So what'd you do during that time?
did a lot of this. Like people flew us places and we talked on stage, which was great. It was cool. We did too much of it. We should have said no to more things, but that's what you do because you don't know if you're going to get another chance.
And did you have a clear sense of what you wanted to do next, or was it the same process of like, hey, let's get together, figure out what design problems we want to solve, start working on them?
Yeah, it was more the design-based thing. Yeah, how did
Same team,
don't know
bigger.
exactly.
Did you absorb some more people? Did you expand a little
Yeah.
bit?
we
for
did,
this?
yeah.
we did.
We were 8 people for Tacoma.
So you added some people to the team and you started work on this next project. And let's take a look at the Tacoma trailer.
Sure thing.
You gonna need any help with that power cell hookup?
Nah, I'm good. Gonna test the connection. How's yours look, baby?
Voltage adapter in place. Ready to rock.
Hit it.
While aboard Tacoma Station, please remember that all activity on this facility is monitored by AR recording.
It's been a year now since our crew has cycled onto the station.
Personally, I'm happy for us.
Happy to be stuck up here with these people for another year.
Debris has...
Meeting Karla?
48 hours of breathable air.
So we've got no air supply, no way to call for help.
Minnie, I'm headed in.
Need to figure out how to do everything we can to set this mission up for success.
I can't do it. This is all crazy.
We know it's not safe working up here.
But VT could...
BT's not coming.
The clock is ticking.
Odin, I'm freaking out.
Close your eyes.
We are the co-founders of Fullbright, and we hope that you'll enjoy finding out how Tacoma was made.
I mean, isn't it strange? We've never felt the Earth's pull together. One day.
One day. Still love that logo type.
Yeah. Should I? Is there another?
No, we don't have
a secret drawer at the end of that trailer.
That trailer was captured and cut by Derek Liu,
Yeah.
who is really great.
I don't have to do our trailers anymore.
Anyway, yeah.
Now, one of the first things that you notice about this is the introduction of more animation. So that's kind of your background.
any
So
animation.
were you excited to be able to like tap into your background and experience as an animator?
I was not the animator on this project. Our animator is Noel Clark, who's amazing, and yeah, all of that was hand animated. We did not have any motion capture. And yeah, no, I mean, I did some direction. Actually, yeah, a fair bit of it, but I burnt out being an animator many years ago, and I'm not going to do it for a living anymore. However, it was really cool to have it as a tool because, like, yeah. So we ended up with these silhouette-y kind of figures because we wanted the motion to be able to stand out and for people to be able to read people's emotional states via gesture and via style of motion and action. And part of that was because we're not going to be doing the whole scanned human head that is a perfect replica of Jeff Goldblum or what have you. It would have been Jeff Goldblum.
Stop giving away what our next game is, Karla.
Confirmed.
We're safe. It's okay. But yeah, it was really nice to have just kind of like the pantomime tool of being able to show people's emotional states. It was really satisfying to go into that, especially from Gone Home, which did not have that.
Yeah. Well, and that was a huge part of the starting point for the game, was that with Gone Home, I think it was really powerful to only have Sam's voice and for you to completely project what you think her experience of the events were, what her experience of the events was. But the flip side of it is with Tacoma, we wanted to see how we could put the player in the room with the characters while the moments were happening without you being able to throw a cup at their face. So it's not real time, but you get to feel what it was like in those moments, not just imagine it. But we still wanted to have the interpretive layer of they are these simplified figures. You do have to picture what their faces looked like when they were going through these moments. You are still actively engaged with what the reality of this thing that you're experiencing would have been.
So was this transition from audio logs to the physical presence, was that one of the kernels at the heart of the design process?
Yeah, I guess it was, honestly, although we didn't come to the rewinding and fast forwarding controls until a little later.
But that was very influenced by Sleep No More, the performance here in the city, which I'm going to for the 4th time tomorrow night. But that whole thing of you can only be in one part of these scenes at one time, and you're putting together points of time by seeing things from different angles and reconstructing it. Our ability to do that as a digital piece where you could actually manipulate not just your position in relationship to where the actors are moving, but you can move the timeline and you can fully kind of own how you're experiencing all of the things that surround you was what we really wanted to dig into.
Yeah, there's an important idea that I just want to underline real quick that is in both of our games so far. We really make the player do a lot of work, a lot of mental work.
Yeah, definitely.
Actually, there's a lot to be done. In Gone Home, there's a lot that you reconstruct between things that are just told to you, and you do it with clues, and you just so much, almost all of the game takes place only inside your head. You're never shown, so much of it, and you really just have to connect the dots. And in Tacoma, it's really, we leverage the player's brain a lot. And in Tacoma, similarly, where you only see these, brief moments that give you an idea of what's happening, but also their personalities, so that then you can see them doing something else later, and you have information to bring to bear on it, and and then we have the environmental objects and whatnot, which also help build that picture. But all of that, like that matrix of information and understanding, is just in your head. It's nowhere. It's not in the game, really.
Right.
Yeah. It's
the implication is in the game.
Right.
But you're following.
Yeah. It only is real when you play it. Honestly,
That's interesting because we have been. We often think of these things like sort of explicit problem solving in games as being sort of opposed to just storytelling and narrative, but really what you're pointing out is the way that the narrative is experienced is itself a form of problem solving. Right, it's not a puzzle.
Yeah.
It's not an explicit puzzle.
Yeah, that's
but it's
true.
still it's puzzly. It's problem solving.
Yeah.
It's engaged.
If you're not paying
But-
attention, you
Right.
will get to the end of the game and you won't know what the story is, or you
Yeah.
won't care
Or
what
you
it
won't.
is because you didn't know why you should care about it because you don't know who the characters are.
Right.
Like it all is asking a lot of the player to be like,
Yeah.
I am going to connect these dots, and that's the work I'm doing. Not really the walking and clicking,
Right.
but the
Right.
like reconstructing is a very mental
Yes.
exercise.
So the
And-
creation of Tacoma, a bigger team now. It's 8, 9 people. You said,
Mm-hmm.
and a longer project.
Yes.
Similar process. Paint us a picture. Are you still in the same house? Is this a new?
Good heavens,
You now
no.
have an office in a mini mall somewhere. What's it?
God, we have to get an office in a mini mall.
Yeah,
What's
now
the-
we're next to the dry cleaners.
Give us a picture of what the day-to-day is like for that over the course of that.
Well, let's see. We finally did get an office, and we got our own apartments, houses to live in, so that we did not all have to be roommates for the next 3 years.
Because you know what? When you want a team of 8 and you're like, you all have to move into this
Yeah,
house. with
sorry
us.
everybody. Yeah, we're all very good friends now. It's weird.
But still no producer, right? Is there now an explicit
No.
producer?
Well,
We
well,
had
it's a problem,
Steve,
though.
and
Yeah,
it
so-
turned out to be actually a problem.
The team is twice
Yeah.
as big and the project is twice as
Yeah.
complex, and I still was the only one doing that work, which was a bad point in the process and something we're doing better in the future.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing was, we made Gone Home as a very small team that basically it was like, whatever needs to get done, one of the 4 of us is going to do it, right? And then you try to do a lot of things the same way at a different scale, and some of them that's fine, and some of them it will kill you. And we discovered what those things were over the course of development, which has been, like, it's going forward into our next project. It has been a really great resource for realizing how we need to be process focused and be balance focused in how we do the work, not just what the project is.
We are very cognizant now of how we really need to set these things up better for the next project because it wasn't particularly healthy
Does that
previously.
mean-
Karla and I were both definitely doing many more jobs than we should have. Like, on Gone Home, we were probably each doing 3 to 5 jobs, and that's actually kind of fine on that scale. Especially when each of the jobs is basically small enough and modular enough that you can hold them. But when you're doing like 8 to 10 jobs on a bigger project,
Right.
it's not good anymore.
And in addition to that, you're running a studio, which
Right.
is a
There's
business.
also that.
We have
yeah.
employees.
And so
We didn't
you have employees
before
now.
that.
You have to worry about healthcare and,
Yep.
and
Payroll and-
payroll and things like that. And so kind of what is that process like in running a studio of that size, and how much of your time is absorbed by those aspects as opposed to like sitting down and actually building the game?
It always ends up being more than you think.
Yeah, way too much.
Yeah, and honestly, it's just one of those fundamental things where it's like we're responsible for people's livelihoods.
Yeah.
Like we're just.
Right.
It's just our job to take care of these people.
Right.
That's
Well, because
scary.
when we were making Gone Home, it was sort of like, well, we're all going in on this together. We're spending our savings on it. If nobody buys this game, we were only out of the industry for a year and a half.
We
We'll
can
go
go
back
back,
and get
yeah.
jobs, But then when you have employees, you're like, if this doesn't do well, we have to fire people, and
Yep.
that's fucked up.
And they have to, stop being able to pay rent on their house. or
Yeah,
move
they have to
someone
go
else
find a
somewhere
new
else,
job,
or-
and it's like that's
Yeah.
And for what it's worth, we shipped the game. It did fine. Nobody quit. We didn't have to fire anybody. Like it all worked out. Hooray!
But it's
and we've
still,
added a couple more people for our next project, including someone whose main job is being a producer because it can't be my
Hooray.
job anymore.
Yay.
But yeah, the production side, not the process side, especially for me and Karla on that project, was too much, but we didn't know it until we were doing too much and we didn't have a lot of alternatives.
Yeah.
So we just did too much until the game came out, and
Then we were
are
very
doing
sad.
better now.
Yes, we're doing a better job.
So
now.
one of the things that people in your position worry about these days is the fact that there's been a shift in small-scale game development within just an enormous amount of titles coming out on a daily basis. That it was not the case 5 years ago, 7 years ago, and people now are starting to like struggle with like how, is it still possible to do this kind of small-scale personal development that is design focused and run a successful business? Is that something that you guys worry about? Or do you just focus on making great games and then...
Right now, we don't worry about it that much because we have the privilege of being established, right? Like, we got to be one of the titles that people bought a lot of copies of when we were hitting the zeitgeist, and that gives you a lot of foundation, a lot of runway. It gives you a lot of cachet as far as, like, getting... having connection, having people basically be like, oh, you guys know what you're doing, we'll support you in various ways. I think that, there's still always the worry that it's like, okay, what if you release this game and nobody buys it? But when it's not your first game, when you have visibility, et cetera, more people will take chances on you. You know what I mean? So it's a little column A, a little column B. But, I think as much as you can say that in 2013, we released a game that was really successful because it was one of the only things like that was around, and there wasn't that crowded of a field. There's also plenty of small games that were coming out then that didn't blow up. And then you got to figure out what you do, So you definitely, I think if you're betting on, having a big hit every single time, is going to catch up with you. But, if you can say, if this game does okay, can we sustain ourselves and keep going and have options? Like, that's a very different piece of calculus,
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, it's not clear whether it's just going to get worse forever also. It's, we kind of just have to see how it goes.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, things totally ebb and flow a lot. So.
Yeah. I want to open it up to questions from the audience. Is there anyone with a question for Steve and Karla? Why don't we go all the way in the back there? Yes. And I don't know do we want to pass a mic, or I'll repeat the question. How about that? Yeah. Sure.
It might help if you stand up.
Yeah, if you don't mind, it would be great. Thanks.
So just one thing that I find very interesting about Gone Home and the whole designing story through creating a space or creating a level is how it's how kind of like games in that way blend level design and sense of gameplay and things like, okay, you have to navigate a space, or perhaps in the case of Bioshock, so like you were saying, you have to think about plasmid and gameplay and all these other things, but also manage to tell a story kind of at the same time through the space. I was just wondering, do you have like any processes or advice for how you think about that sort of problem when you approach it?
So the question is about storytelling through level design, and is there anything about the principles or process of that you can share?
Yeah. So a really simple axiom that I've mentioned elsewhere is that the shape of the space is the shape of the story. So you're building the space that will define how you encounter the story. So in something like Gone Home, we use gates and keys to guarantee that it's like you're going to be on the front porch, then you're going to be in the entryway, then you're going to be in one of these two spaces. You get to kind of pick a branch, but like we know what the shape of the space you're going to be navigating is, and now we can say, therefore, these pieces of the story should be laid out in this way to, have a fairly reliable expectation of how the player will encounter it. And in our case, for something like Gone Home, the idea is you need to have been given the opportunity to discover everything in this space before we, for instance, give you the basement key that says, like, basement on it. Oh, I should probably go down and use this key in the basement. And, we kind of signal you to move on. But also for Tacoma, we built the spaces for all of the sections of the station before I could write any of the story scenes, because the question is like, okay, if we've got the kitchen here and the game room here and the bunk here and the office here, since it's a very spatially based game, I have to be able to say like, well, if these two people are talking in the kitchen, the people in the game room aren't going to be able to hear them, and if they walk over here, it's going to take them about this long, and so when their paths intersect, if someone's coming from the game room to the kitchen, they're going to pass these other people, so how are they involved with their scene, like all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So I would say that spaces first always make sense to me, because then you know what the environment that the story is going to live in is.
A sort of clarifying corollary for that is space and time are overlaid. You experience time through experiencing the space, or sort of the other way around. And so, like, as you progress, time progresses, and you progress through the space. And it's a relatively clear way of thinking about it.
It's something that it's something that I noticed from working on the BioShock series that I've never thought of as an end user, and it took me a lot of playing through it and working on it to realize. But it's unspoken. I don't think anyone ever notices it, and so it doesn't break anybody's immersion or cause problems. But coincidentally, as you progress through the levels of BioShock, you also find the audio diaries in the chronological order that they happened in.
Yeah, that's
how about that?
Thing,
And these tape players were really laid out in a useful way.
No, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, and so in Gone Home, it's like the thing that's nice about Gone Home is that you aren't finding tapes. Right, so like I had.
Well, you are, but
yes, but they don't have story elements. They don't have audio diaries on them. So you're not finding like, oh, here's a diary page that my sister tore out and left here. There was this point in development where I realized that design stuff. If you have signifiers in your game, i.e., audio diaries, which are important, are always on tape decks. What's important about this game is finding audio diaries. So I should look for the tape decks and ignore everything else. If that's not the experience you want, you have to solve that problem, right? And so the point of Gone Home was we wanted to say everyone should be interested in everything, and everything they find should be relevant to their understanding of the story and add to their interpretation. And for that to be true, it meant there needed to not be torn out diary pages lying around, because then it's like, why do you look at anything else that's not the main story
objects?
Yeah.
And so we went for intermittent reinforcement.
Right. Well, and we went for no signaling of what might give you the important thing, right? So like anything you could click on might give you an audio diary, which means you should click on everything, and then you get an unscheduled reward at certain points. But it means that you aren't going to skip anything, because anything could have something in it, which allowed us to put the story in an order in, I think, an even more organic way than, isn't it funny how her voice diary tapes are all laid out in the order that I'm exploring this space. But it still, at the end of the day, meant I'm going to go to this area first, then this, and unless you're intentionally being achronological for an interesting reason, you can assume that will also allow the player to arrange the progression of the story in the order that they experience the physical space.
Nice.
Like in their head.
Okay, I'm going to go all the way in the back, and then we have a bunch over here, so then we'll work our way back up. All the way in the back. Yes? Yes, shout it out.
So I was just wondering how this might apply more to Gone Home. You kind of touched on this as well, but I was wondering if you could expand on it, how you think using the soundtrack and the music that you license influence the storytelling, or like allow you to...
So the question is about the music in Gone Home, and did those licensed songs influence the storytelling?
I mean, I think that it's a tone thing. So we chose a certain number of tracks based on kind of what the feel behind them was, right? So we were able to say, if this is a contemplative moment that happens in this audio diary in this room, we can pair it with one of our like low-key songs that we've licensed. Or if this is a point where there's like a lot of conflict
and tension
between Sam and Lonnie and the kids at school, we can have like this really like an angry song that you find that reinforces that feeling. I think probably it did more to reinforce the setting and the place and the time than like the events of the story, but place and time and setting are part of the narrative in an integral way. So,
and it was useful for the trailers for sure.
Yeah,
like just to have stuff that already fit into the game that we could, then like easily encapsulate aspects of it to show other people, because we have to do that.
Well, and there's something that I think is important about, like you were saying early on, Gone Home very much takes place in our world, and so it was important to me to talk about Street Fighter and talk about Kurt Cobain and talk about, like what shows are on TV and have actual music from the actual world that these characters would have been listening to if they were real people that lived in the same universe we do, and to just ground it in that space of these are people I could have known.
Yep.
And the music was definitely part of that.
Yeah, so let's go right here. Yeah.
Hi, my name is George. You guys talked about design and mechanics first and then story, but like, how did you decide what was actually feasible? Like, when you guys left your jobs and got together in Portland, and like, what was that conversation like?
Feasibility. At what point did you really have a conversation about what are we capable of doing, given our skill set and capacity?
I mean, we had all worked in AAA for a while, and we had a finite amount of savings, and we didn't have any intention of finding outside money. I'm sure, would have tried to if it was absolutely necessary. But it was sort of like, we know what our rent is, we know what our general living expenses are, we know what kind of outside contracting stuff and like music licensing stuff and voice recording stuff we're going to have to do. So how long can we live on that money, and therefore what can we get done with what we have and who we have in that amount of time?
If you're asking more about specifically the design aspects, I mean, like, honestly, we were super solid on how to make like a BioShock by that point, because we had all been immersed in various versions of that for some time, and we were like, okay, we know how to do this, we could do it, but we can't do all of it. What part would we cut? And like, it's the stuff that we were able to do pointed clearly towards cutting the combat and focusing on the thing that can live without that, because combat couldn't necessarily live without the environmental aspects, but maybe the environment could live without the combat.
Right. Well, and along the doing what you know thing, so I've done a couple of GDC talks about Gone Home. One was called "Why Is Gone Home a Game?" And it's about the design side of stuff. So as far as the stuff I'm proud about like what the design accomplished, that talk, which I believe is free, you don't have to have Vault access or whatever, is available. And the other one I did as a tandem talk with Kate Craig, our environment artist, and it's the level design of Gone Home. And we talk very much about how the spaces were built and what the thinking was behind them. But to Karla's point, at some point in that talk, I like side by side compare the top-down layout of the first level of Minerva's Den and the top-down layout of the house in Gone Home, and they're basically the same. Like, I was like, let's just do that.
How so? Do they both have a kind of hub and spoke structure?
100%. They've got a central hub with a east, north, and west
And
wing.
why does that work? What is it about hub and spoke that makes it so good for this kind of experience?
Reuse of space.
Yeah, but it can be very annoying and disorienting.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, the gradual unlocking of spaces, I think, is satisfying to a player. The ability to make things chronological in a non-linear space by blocking off 2 of the 3 wings from when you start, I think, is valuable.
There's also the clarity of finishing one wing and being like, or I go there, I come back, I know I'm done. Now I'm back in the middle, and now I know which ones I get to choose from next.
You loop back through, and you're like, oh, I'm back where I started. Okay.
And I did that one.
But now I have access to a new area, and I can move on.
So it's just very clear what point you're at in the sequence.
And that's that's a big reason why in Gone Home the house is an old Victorian house, because it's big and sprawling and corridor-y, which is great for guiding players from in spaces sequentially versus a mid-century house that's very open plan. It's like, where do you go next? I don't know. So yeah, all of that stuff is very much like, let's do what we know works and apply it to this thing that has a different focus.
Yeah.
Yes. Right.
I'm Finn. I have always been enamored by a single design choice in Gone Home, which was the fact that all the lights are off at the beginning and you have to go around until the light switches on. And to me, that was because I get very scared very easily.
Sorry.
The first time I Gone
You're not the only one.
Oh God, this is a horror game. Until I found the first light switch and went, oh no, this is something different. And I just wanted to, maybe I'm focusing on a very tiny detail, but I found this interesting. The tone setter as the first thing I went to my brain is, well, it must be, it couldn't be anymore. And I had to find something else. I just wanted to know if that was something you were actually thinking about, how to present your game.
So the question is about the lights, which all start off in Gone Home, and then you turn them on. And was that a conscious design decision? And when did that?
We did want people to be able to yeah, like illuminate the world as they traversed it. Like that felt really solid, like experientially. Also, it's straight up what you would do if you come
It's
into
something that's
it,
inherent to like being
right.
in a house.
Yeah,
right?
it's totally
Yeah.
what you would do. You come into a house and you're like, I'm gonna turn the light on and see what's in here. People also, which we didn't foresee immediately, but people super used light as a way to mark their path. So if they had been into one room and then they came back from the other way or whatever, they were like, was I in there? The lights are on. I did it, and that was also just sort of a good tool. But like it feels like what you would do. Like you show up in an old house, you're gonna turn the lights on. It just felt solid.
Right. It's like a dark and stormy night. So it's like, this is like inherently this is a weird, spooky place. So, okay, we'll start it dark. And you get to turn on the lights as you progress. The other side of that...
Thematic as hell. Also. Anyway.
The other side of what Karla's pointing out and to a question earlier is that the lights are also a player guiding mechanism. So not just... So like a really straightforward thing in level design is like you have a room... It's maybe dark or just sort of dim or flatly lit, and you put the spotlight on the important thing. Okay, like the player will probably go there and check it out. You're telling them this is important. In Gone Home, most of the time you start out you enter a room and it's mostly dark. Maybe there's one light on that's like on the other side of the room, so you have to like get there. So you're going to traverse some stuff to get to the other side. So we didn't necessarily use this thing's important, let's put a spotlight on it, but we knew that people would be seeking out light sources, so we could have the entire room start dark and then put an important thing next to the lamp, because we knew people would go there to turn the light on and then they see the thing. And so that is a very useful way to have granular player direction within a room, along with the meta player direction of, I finished this room, I'm going to go down the hall to the next one, I found a locked door, I'm going to find the key and come back to it.
Right. And what about this teasing that it might be a horror game? How conscious and deliberate was that?
It was more of something where, I mean, it's understandable but funny. Okay, so players only see the finished product, right? From our perspective, we were like, okay, family house, 90s, old, mansion that's laid out all in this winding way. You get there, you're there by yourself. Why can't you just call the cops? Well, because the phones are out. Why are the phones out? Because there's a huge storm outside. That's also why you can't just walk out the front door and walk into town, because it's pouring and you got a shuttle from the airport, so you don't have a car. And so now we're like, okay, you're in an old creaky mansion in the middle of the night in a thunderstorm when all the like phones and TVs are out. People are going to think this is a horror game. And so the first third of the game is very intentionally trying to disabuse people of the notion that this is going to be a horror game. So things like, for instance, you go upstairs into Sam's bathroom, and I was like, absolutely, people are going to walk into these rooms and be like, when am I going to turn on the light and see a dead body? Right. So we're like, okay, go into the bathroom. There's blood all over the tub. Finally, the murder happened. And then you go in and we're like, it's red hair dye. They're teenage girls. This is not a horror game. It's about something else. And so throughout the game, we were playing with that of okay, Sam and Lonnie have their ghost hunting journal, and they're like, Oscar's ghost is still in the house. Because again, people would be like, when is the zombie or the ghost going to come get me? So it's like, okay, the kids thought that too, right? But this game takes place in the real world. So if you went to your aunt and uncle's house and your teenage cousin had written down a ghost hunting journal, you would think, oh, my cousin is like a funny teenager. You wouldn't think, fuck, there's ghosts in this house. So I would say that it was not our intent to do this is a horror game fake out, but it was our consciousness of the fact that we were setting people up to assume there was going to be some jump scares and to try to walk them away from that. So by the time the game was finished, they were playing because they cared about the people, because they know them as people, not because they're wondering when they're finally going to get serial killered.
So by the time they got to the jump scare, they were really extra ready for it.
I mean, yeah, there was some trolling.
Oh, yeah.
I think we have time for maybe two more. Let's go right here.
I was wondering what your research process is for these games, because I think I heard a little bit about about like I heard like maybe you guys did like a submarine or something to look into Tacoma. I don't know, or something.
We totally did a submarine. We went in
the
one.
question is
Yes.
about your research process. What's your research process like?
It's significant. We were very serious about doing our research, and like with Tacoma, we went into a submarine that was decommissioned and it's locally around, and we read books by astronauts and whatnot. But
about living on like the space station specifically,
because it's very relevant. But arguably more importantly, our research includes doing interviews with people who've had experiences similar to the characters that we're writing about, and we're very serious about representing our characters like accurately and sympathetically and in the most like true way we can. And so we're fairly rabid about that.
There's reading stuff. There's reading books. There's looking up personal accounts that have been written in blogs or memoir or whatever. Something that's really important to us for all of our games, we've always interviewed people. So for Gone Home, I found this blog called Made This Way, I think, which was just people submitting their stories of coming out to their family, and like, okay, I can read about a lot of women's experience of like what it was like for them. And I read Girls to the Front, which is a memoir about the riot girl scene and other stuff like that. But I also reached out to people that I knew were somewhere within my circle, who I knew were queer women who had like grown up in the 90s or early 2000s and had actually lived that experience. And I sat down with each of them. I think it was 3 people on that project, and just did like a multi-hour interview with them about just what they remember about their experience. And with Tacoma, we didn't talk to any astronauts, sadly, but we have a character who is a practicing Muslim, not like super religious, but like it's part of her identity. And so we talked to people like Rami Ismail and other people that we knew in the games industry and people that they introduced us to be like, what can you tell us about what you would expect from a Muslim character in this space? They're like not super religious, but they aren't completely, like separate from the faith. So like, what would you see? What would be right? What would be wrong? Mm-hmm. It was really cool because one person we talked to, she was like FaceTiming with us during the interview, and she was like college age at the time and living with her family, and so like she was like FaceTiming, talking about the stuff, and then she was like, there'll be like passages from the Quran and like a plaque or a tapestry. Actually, my parents have a bunch of that stuff. She just walked around with her phone and was like, like this kind of plaque, you would totally have one of those. And we're like, and we asked her to send us like high-res photos of them, and then made one of the assets in the game out of that plaque that was in her parents' house.
And like the stuff that Sam's parents said to her are like direct quotes from people we know as parents and shit like that. Like these are things people said to them.
And along with the upfront research, the other important thing is to have people with the lived experience play builds, because both for Gone Home and Tacoma, we were able to say like, here's a pre-release build, can you play through, and is there anything in here that if you played this, you would be like, what's up? And like for Gone Home, we were lucky to for people to be like, no, this is pretty, I don't know, works for me. With Tacoma, it was relatively low impact, but like some really subtle stuff came across. Like one of the people who had given us input on like, the kind of like Muslim faith experience for this character, they played in that, they played through the game and they went into that character's bunk, and they were like, well, that plaque that has the Quran passage on it, you kind of put it on like the middle shelf of this bookshelf, and that would always be on the top shelf. And we were like, oh, we will now move it to the top shelf. But you don't have the lived experience, so you would never know. And then you get to release the game, and then people get to tell you. And that's not good.
And I mean, like, the reason that that Gone Home needed less guidance in that regard is that we had, like, multiple women on the team who had been alive during that time period. So, like, it was easier for us to guide that stuff. But, Tacoma we had way more diverse characters, and so we definitely had to work at that a lot more.
Well, listen, I think we're out of time. Before I let you go, is there anything that you can tell us about what's coming next? Can you hint a little bit about what you're currently working on, or what we can expect? Is there anything?
I mean, we are working on our next project. Mm-hmm. We're like 3 months into it. It's really early. Mm-hmm.
Just give us a crumb of like, we know your design process. Can you maybe give us a hint about some of the design issues that you're grappling with? Is that am I asking too much? Am I pressing too hard?
No.
Ooh, a little sign language.
I thought you were going to say car racer.
All right, well, you heard it here first. That's the kind of insider scoop that we give you. Steve and Karla, it's an honor to speak with you. It's amazing. Great conversation. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having us.
The Fullbright team.